So very briefly, to speak a little bit, introduce to you Malalai Joya's life story. To get the whole thing, you have to buy the book afterwards from People's Co-op Bookstore, selling them here tonight. As a young infant, Malalai didn't know her father because her father had been targeted for his involvement in the struggle for liberation from the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, been targeted by the Afghan puppets of that invasion. And so when she was born in 1978, for a few years she didn't know if her father was dead or alive. They only reunited when her family was forced into exile to live as refugees in Iran. There with her father, mother, and eventually nine brothers and sisters, they grew up as refugees in the camps of Pakistan, where hundreds of thousands and even millions of Afghans were driven during the 1980s, and of course many still remain, although Pakistani government has been forcibly closing many of those camps in recent years. There, at more than half her life ago, when she was 14 or 15, she became an activist and actually worked as a teacher, teaching illiterate fellow refugees to read. After she would take her classes in the day, she would give literacy classes in the evening. And she even was able to help to teach her mother to read and write. And from there, Malalai became more and more politically committed, again at an extremely young age. At the age of 19, she made a courageous decision to go back into Afghanistan during the years of the Taliban regime and work with an organization called OPAC, which she may speak a little bit more about, an incredible organization that at the time of the Taliban, they were some of the people organizing the secret underground girls' schools in supporters' basements. And Malalai would sneak her books under her burqa every day and go to these secret schools. And she did this work for several years. And I think this alone gives her a lot of credibility today when she speaks out about the situation of women under this current regime and occupation, and about the fact that the situation for women has not improved. From there, she moved back to her home province in Farah, and in and around the time of 2001, 9/11, and the subsequent invasion by the United States and its allies, Canada as well, Malalai worked, and with the same organization, OPAC, she opened an orphanage, helped to open an orphanage and a free medical clinic, which provided care and shelter for orphan children and also medical care for really the whole province of Farah, which is, like all the remote provinces of Afghanistan, to this day completely lacking in basic infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Malalai was already well known when she was in her early 20s because of this social activist work, and that's why her friends and family and others encouraged her to put herself forward for the Loya Jirga, which was a constitutional assembly held in 2003 to create a new constitution for the post-war Afghanistan, occupation regime in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, this regime was full of warlords and fundamentalists and some of the worst people in the entire history of Afghanistan, people who had killed thousands, especially during the Civil War year. While Malalai was the youngest delegate there, she was also the most courageous and principled. And she was the only one, or the one to do most strongly, to speak up. They gave her 90 seconds on the microphone, and then they cut her microphone. She spoke up and denounced the presence of these killers and warlords in this new regime that was being set up. And I'll stop her biography there. She went on to be elected to the parliament and then expelled for her outspoken views by these same warlords and their supporters. Before Malalai spoke out at this Loya Jirga, even her best, strongest supporters were saying, if you do this, they will kill you. And they weren't saying they'll kill you eventually. These people, and there was a good chance that day that they would kill her, and indeed they did try. Despite this, she got to the microphone, she had her 90 seconds, and the rest is history to some extent, but unfortunately the situation in Afghanistan has not improved. And over the past 6 years, Malalai has survived 5 assassination attempts. As I mentioned, she was expelled from this so-called democratic parliament, and we'll talk more about the so-called elections that take place in this occupied country. But Malalai, we're lucky to have her here tonight, and it's an honor to have been part of the process of getting this book out, and we're just delighted to have her here again amongst us. No one's cutting off her mic tonight. Let's all give a warm, warm welcome to Malalai Joya.
Right now I come from a land of tragedy like Afghanistan that 8 years ago, after 9/11 tragedy, US and NATO, they pushed us from the frying pan into the fire. These Northern Alliance fundamentalists who are brother in creed of the Taliban, they did civil war in Afghanistan from 92 to 96. Alone in Kabul, in the capital of my country, they killed more than 65,000 innocent civilians. And to know better about them, you can see Human Rights Watch website, Amnesty International website, and many books has been written about them. Today, situation of women in most of provinces as catastrophic as it was under the domination of Taliban. But the only difference between Taliban period with now is that all of these crimes are happening under the name of democracy, women's rights, human rights. We are talking about women's rights in Afghanistan, but most of women of my country, they do not have human life. These warlords, these misogynists who are in power, seem like Taliban. Together now, they even cut the nose and ears of the women through hot waters on them. Rape cases, kidnappings, acid attacks, domestic violences, kidnapping of women are increasing rapidly. The women of my country, even they didn't gain the limited rights that they enjoyed in the centuries of 60s, 70s, and 80s. In US government, NATO, Canada, shamelessly they portray themselves they are telling big lies to the people of their country through mainstream media that first time we brought women's rights in Afghanistan, which is not true. It is true in some big cities like Kabul, Herat, Mazar Sharif, when you go, some women, they have access to job and education. First of all, even in these big cities do not have my people security, men and women, but in faraway provinces, situation for my people, especially women, is like hell. Today, they are not only women of my country who suffer a lot. Millions of Afghan men and women, both of them do not have liberation at all. They suffer from injustice, insecurity, corruption, joblessness, poverty, etc. US and NATO, including Canada government, occupied my country under the banner of women's rights. And day by day, these warlords who are with the mask of democracy, they are in power. They themselves tear their mask for the great people around the world. Maybe you hear that recently these Shia fundamentalists in Afghanistan, they made misogynist law against Shia women in my country, which is quite similar like Taliban. 7 articles of this law is completely like Taliban period, you can see in Human Rights Watch website, but let me give you one example of this law. They ban women to go out or go to the doctor or have job without permission of their husband, which is elementary rights of the woman. And this disgusting law, despite national and international condemnation, has been passed and has been signed by Hamid Karzai, this shameless puppet man, who did compromise with these terrorist misogynists, and still he is doing compromise with them. The only difference between Taliban period with now is that day by day these warlords, they are making legal their crimes. If they make this kind of disgusting law or do not make, they are already in power and continue to their fascism.